Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here's your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Wilson, and I'm the founder and host of the People in Fundraising webcast. I started this about a year ago to talk with fundraising executives, get both the professional and the personal sides of their stories. And today I'm really honored to have Jennifer Filla, who is the CEO of Aspire and runs the Prospect Research Institute, joining us today. Good morning, Jen. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me here today, Tim. I'm excited about this. I've seen your other interviews, and I'm just thrilled to be here.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your kind remarks. That's great. Thank you for carving out some time to watch some of this output. And one reason why I wanted to have Jen on the program today, and a lot of people know in prospect development, her Prospect Research Institute. Jen, what about 2023 is monumental for you and the Prospect Research Institute, please?
Yeah, you're not kidding. I'm starting to feel old now. It's been a decade. This is a decade old now.
Awesome.
So I have been sticking with it for 10 years. A lot has changed, but that's just huge. I had imagined that the Institute would eclipse Aspire, and I'd be so busy that I just have to do this, and that didn't happen. But it has been a very rewarding journey, and I'm excited about 10 years.
That is so cool. Congratulations. That's a great accomplishment.
Thank you.
Jen, if you wouldn't mind taking maybe a moment before we get into the standard questions and describing or sharing how Aspire and the Prospect Research Institute function. Is one part of the other, or how does that work, please?
Right. So I founded Aspire Research Group in 2007, and that was just me doing research. It was great. I was excited to be able to do that. And then in 2013, I started to say, what do I really want to do? Like, do I want to keep doing this consulting thing? Should I change that up? And that was a lot to do with sales, because I just was never the frontline person, right? And I was like, do I really want to do that? Yeah. So I started the Institute in 2013. I thought about it, all the stuff you have to do before you can actually launch, and then launched in 2014. And I wanted it as a separate company, so I incorporated it separately. But in the past 2 years, pulled it together. So now the Institute operates under Aspire, merged them back together. Technically, since we're all in research, we worry about incorporation records. And that has just been fantastic, because now there's just one team and everything supports everything else. So that was a much better decision.
Excellent. Very cool. Thank you for describing that for us. Now, if we go back even before Aspire Research Group, Jen, if you want to take just a few minutes, please, and talk with us about how you entered the nonprofit profession.
Yeah, it's always a curious thing. Like, how do people arrive at nonprofit? Well, it's less curious now because there's like the Lilly School of Philanthropy, but way back when, there wasn't, in the 90s. And I had spent a decade raising my daughter, being a legal secretary and then an executive assistant. And during that time, gosh, I think it took me 9 years, I went to school at night. And so along came the big milestone, 30 years old, I got my bachelor's degree. And I was like, okay, this is it. Like, this is my chance, because as an executive assistant, I was already supposed to have one, right? According to the job descriptions. And I knew, like, if I didn't do something different now, the HR departments, wherever I wanted to go, would never even look at my resume. So I went ahead and I thought for a while, like, oh, wouldn't it be fun to work at a toy company? Everybody loves toys. Like that'd be
Hmm.
so cool. Or a candy company. So I like researched different industries, trying to figure out what to do with myself. And I ended up replying to an ad in the classifieds because they were a thing.
Hmm.
And it was for a nonprofit, the Delaware County Historical Society in Pennsylvania. And they were looking for someone to run their Passport to History program, which sounded like a lot of fun. So it was teaching kids about local history. So I had to like interact with all the local historical societies and the historical sites. I had to go into the schools because it was part of the fourth grade curriculum. And so took the job and it all began. It was fun.
That is so cool. What a fascinating beginning.
It just sort of happened.
It does. Yes. I had one other guest a few weeks ago say, like, accidental fundraisers. We just, you know, as you mentioned, like, Lilly School of Philanthropy and other avenues now, but I also was a young professional in the Bill Clinton administration days. And I mean, just temping. As I mentioned in our conversation via chat bite, had no idea really about the inner workings and the variety of fundraising roles. So very cool. And I remember the classifieds as well. So
Lots of dirty fingers, pulling those pages, calling, yeah, writing letters, sending the mail in the mail with stamps. Yeah.
yes, those were things back then. Well, if we can take a moment, Jen, if it's okay, thank you for looking back at the beginnings of your career. Now with the Prospect Research Institute at 10 years, what do you hope and what are you maybe working towards for the next 10 years for your institute as well as for the clients you serve, the people on your team, and for you professionally?
Wow, that's big. That's a big picture.
Yeah.
What I want to see happen at the end of the 10 years is that there's this place you can go where you can get certified. So
Mm,
let's say you want to enter the profession and you need to get the credentials because the more we become a profession, the harder it gets to get that first job. Although we're growing so fast, like they need to take new people all the time. So having that ability to say, I have this, and it means I can do the job. I can walk in and do a pretty good job. Like I'm starting out, and I don't have experience working in places, but look, I prove I can do all these things, like create a profile, find prospects in a file, data mining kind of stuff. So I would love to see that happen because then we would have people starting off on a great foot because you may or may not get training when you take on these jobs.
sure, that's
So
true.
you get it ahead of time. That'd be so awesome. And then also a place where you can find a community and you can choose that community. I don't know what
Mm,
that'll look like because 10 years is a long time from now. And
yeah.
I've already learned that I need to just let go and let things happen. I don't need to, I can't see what it's going to look like, but that's what I want to have happen, that people feel like they can find a community for themselves and so they can nurture and grow their careers, because that's also a challenge. We're very geographically dispersed. So we often feel alone. Maybe that won't happen in 10 years. I don't know, but I bet you
Yeah.
it will. We still have Facebook.
Yes.
Oh my God. And then I'd also like to see a place where you can get rigorous education. So for us as researchers, we frequently have to just do something and get it done.
Mm,
And there isn't the time to step back and create our own curriculum and
yeah.
dig in and really understand what we just threw into that profile or what we just did with those numbers or how we just looked at that file. So I really like to have a place where you can go to get that, where you could say, I need to learn this. And bingo, you can go in there and you can talk to other people about it and get that interactive experience no matter where you are in the world, which we have to check to do.
Yeah, I love those ideas. That's fascinating. And if there's any way that you think I can be helpful, in developing this, I'd love to continue in conversation with you, because that's really cool.
Interesting you say that, because so last year we were transitioning to a new online platform, which is going to give us all these benefits, but it's like going from a boomerang to a razor's edge. Whoa. Like, now we have to have a specialist who knows how to use the system. And then we have to try to like talk with her about how we can do things that we're going to do. Like, oh my gosh. So it's a whole new world. But in that process, we really honed how we create courses. And there's still a lot of progress to make there for us, but it opens up us to bring in an expert and have them as like a consultant to us, so that we can then create that rigorous course around the expert knowledge. And I've been wanting to do this forever, have like made steps in the past and never got where I wanted to go. But this time I feel like we're really ready. And in addition, so we'll be able to bring in an expert like you, Tim. You're an expert on a subject that you want to talk about and share. Maybe you speak a lot at APRA and you're like, I'm ready. I want to share this. I want to turn it into a course. And then part of that I feel is so, so important is like, once it's all put together, you got to run it by your peers. That peer review piece, I think, gets missed a lot when training materials are created. And so that peer review then lets those other aspects come in, like, well, I'm from a little humane society and I have no idea what you're talking about there. That doesn't work in my office. Or I'm in healthcare and have you thought about this? So we can create courses that are rigorous and comprehensive. And we can't touch everything in a course, right? But I'm just so excited about being able to bring the experts in and create these things that then we don't have that dissonance. Well, I don't work at university, so I can't use that. Unless it's a specific university course.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. And as you were talking, Jen, I was already thinking of one or two people in particular with very specific content that they've presented on at sort of APRA chapter level. And they're great presenters and they really are passionate about the work. So I'm happy to share those with you offline. And I totally get the peer review piece, because I moderated a panel for APRA last month, and I didn't run the questions by anyone else ahead of time except for the panelists. And they didn't work in prospect development. They worked in fundraising. And a lot of people in the webinar were like asking more specific questions about prospect research. And as they were coming in, I'm like, oh, right, Tim, like, know your audience. It's not just the panelists. So lesson learned. And I'm really glad you brought up that point about peer reviewing, because that is so essential.
It is. Yeah. It's important to recognize people's roles, what someone's good at. So you can bring in an expert and they're very good at one thing, but that doesn't mean that that's the whole thing for training.
Yeah.
That case study model is awesome, but for on-the-job training, I need to go in and do my job. I have to then reinterpret what you've told me in your case study, and that doesn't work as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point. I'm excited for you. And yeah, please feel free to connect with me. I'd love to help as I can. That sounds really exciting.
Great. And I'd be happy to hear from anybody. I can't be overwhelmed. There's only so much I could do, but I try. Yeah, I tend to say yes too frequently. I need to table
Me
things.
too.
It's always good to have a list. Always good to have a list.
Excellent. Very cool. Well, Jen, my next question, I'm going to have to read the quote, first, but I think there may be some connection to this quote with the book that you co-authored with another prospect development thought leader, Helen Brown, the Helen Brown group called Prospect Research for Fundraisers. And if you've thought about this ahead of time, I'd love to hear your thoughts, how this quote applies to the work you've done with that book and other vehicles here. It's from Carl Jung. And he says that your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. And as I read that quote, Carl Jung was a prominent thinker in the late 19th century, early 20th century. I thought about the possible applications to your career as you've co-authored the book, as you've launched Aspire Research Group and Prospect Research Institute. Your book specifically addressed a critical need, and you presented that to an outward audience. So you're looking outside and dreaming it up. But then as you look inside, to tie it back to the quote, and awakened, I wondered, what about the looking inside piece and awakening professional interests resonates with you, with the things you've since pursued?
Yeah, deep. That was deep. So I would say that, at least this has been my experience, if you want personal growth, start a business. And maybe you've experienced this, Tim. You started this video cast. If you want personal growth, try reaching out to people you don't know and asking them to be on your video cast. Try to figure out all the logistics, all the software you have to navigate, and the people and stuff. So that's definitely been all the way for me. I have it's intense personal growth is what it is. Be a little tiresome sometimes. But reaching out to Helen was like a shot in the dark, asking, hey, do you want to write a book with me? Just had so much respect for her, had worked for her as a subcontractor, when starting. Yes, absolutely. And I had no higher ed experience. I was like, I can't write a book without higher ed experience. I just feel like that would be silly. I would make a fool of myself. So it was a wonderful pairing, and I learned so much from Helen across that whole experience. And part of what happened out of that book was, wow, like I do know something. I do have something really to offer to a wider audience than I may have dreamed about. And I was kind of pushed into replying to the RFP. It was the Association of Fundraising Professionals had put out a request for an author on prospect research. And a couple of folks in my local chapter were members of the publishing committee. And I think one was on some other committee. And they're like, Jen, you should do this. You should do this. And I'm like, really? So afterwards, it was, wow. It's so cool we did this. And I had just started on sales training at the same time, which for me was so hard, really hard to get through that. And was like the beginning of a different person. And that's happened multiple times to me, where I really just had a sea change. And sometimes I can say, oh, well, this happened. And sometimes I'm like, I have no idea what happened, but I'm suddenly feel different.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's been quite a journey. And I've just always been really driven. Had to overcome a lot of obstacles all the time. And so I don't know how to stop. I just don't know how to stop. So yeah, I love the journey, even when I'm tired. And I get really excited, and sometimes I'll get really tired, and then I just coast. I know now, just coast for a bit, because something else will energize me. And sure enough, if I let everything rest, something comes along and I get excited again.
I love that. And I think the wisdom of taking a pause and I think a lot of us learned that during the pandemic and afterwards too. But maybe for you that was even before the pandemic. Of I can only go so far, so fast, and yet have that internal struggle of. And I think I'm similar to you in some regard here, that I love the challenge. Sometimes I say yes to too much, and then I have to figure out my energy level, my time commitment, managing all that. And I really think there's just wisdom again in saying, okay, I'm going to take it a little easier today than the rest of the week. I once had a boss at my first employer, and she was in her 60s and had a different career for most of her life outside of higher ed, but brought just tremendous knowledge about life and working with different people to managing a prospect development team. And her name is Marianne Ayako. And I remember at one particular moment, the team of us, we were doing mostly event bios. It felt like for 3 weeks in a row. And at one point, she just gathered the team in the hallway and said, if you need today to be a lower energy day, I support that. And that's always stuck with me. That was now 6 or 7 years ago. Whether that comes from your manager or comes from yourself, I like how you phrased that. So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I now have a team. So in 2018, I think I hired, or maybe 2017, my first employee, which I had never wanted to do, but it was like, do that or do something else I didn't want to do. Like, okay, we're going to try this. And one of the things, we're all virtual, always have been. So how do you manage that? And I really, really hated like the sick policy and the overtime policy and the policy. So you, in my world, do your work and I trust you. If you need to take off the afternoon or take a nap or whatever, as long as you're working and productive, and we all have our projects, there needs to be a project for when there's downtime, because we have times that are faster and slower. And I want to see progress there too, whatever you choose to do. But yeah, that has been just makes me feel so good to be able to provide people with an environment where they can really thrive and are trusted and have autonomy in their work and still get the paycheck and, benefits. That's really nice. So that's pretty thrilling. But yes, sometimes I have to remind myself, like, I can take time off.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there may be an echo on my end, so I'm trying not to respond like right in the moment. But these are great insights from you. And I imagine that flexibility and the trust you give your team makes for enhanced commitment on their part, that like you're treated as an adult managing their time. And I think, for me and for others I've talked to, like that level of trust and commitment of like, I'm not watching the clock all the time, Tim. It resonates and has a positive impact on the work that we do.
I hope so.
Yeah. So Jen, we have about 10 more minutes. Just want to be mindful of your time on this Friday. What aspects of fundraising consulting and instruction, putting out content for professionals in prospect development, appealed to you as you launched both the Aspire Research Group and the Prospect Research Institute?
I really enjoyed research. I still do. I love researching people, sorting and filtering and all the things. And when I started the Institute, it had been a culmination of years of speaking, writing learning aids to go with that workshop. I had written a little publication that had gotten reviewed by one of those who was a member of the publishing committee for AFP. I'll never forget getting the review back from her and all that read. I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I had to rewrite a lot of it. And she was right, which was the worst part. So I love I guess the commonality is that I love taking complex things and making them simple, not dumbing it down, but like looking for the bones, because I want to be like that sculptor that, what is the core that you put onto it to create something? And for example, one of the things that my goals this year is to figure out what makes a great profile. Like, how do you decide? You look at it, how do you know if it's good or not?
Sure.
Right? I've been reviewing profiles for years. I want to stop it. And I'm like, well, I can't until I can show someone what I'm doing. Like, what am I doing? So yeah. I want to do that. That gets me excited. I'm like, oh, wow, this is wild. Like, what does make a good profile? And then digging in and coming up with things and how can we name it? How can we look at it? Then trying it. Like, does that work? Can I create a rubric? So that complex to simple. And another example, complex is simple, but also how does it apply? So I'm running a series of master classes starting in April on the finance industry, hedge fund, private equity, venture capital. Oh, the bane of our existence. How do you calculate that compensation, right? And then not just that, but like, how do you do it a little bit? And then how do you do it a lot? Because you might just be at the beginning and need to qualify them, on paper. And then you might be closer to the end and you need to really make sure your gift officer has the details they need. So like, that's crazy talk, right?
Yes.
But I love it. So like the master class is the 101. It's like, what do you have to know about that industry to understand how they're making money? And then what's the first step to looking at how could you ballpark a compensation? How could you throw them into a category without getting super detailed? So yeah, I love doing that. And I think that follows through everything. Like if we're putting something in a profile, the person reading it has to understand it and has to understand how it relates to cultivating them for a gift. So I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. I love that sense of complexity versus simple and that sculptor analogy as well. I in fact, just this week, someone from Minnesota put a question in the L about a rating template and not so much what information to include, but how do I, as the prospect development person, give the audience that'll receive that template an indication of how I arrived at that capacity analysis. And I just thought that was a really interesting question. And I had a template kicking around from my last place. And so I sent it to her. But I think, how are we condensing and contextualizing the information we're providing for our audience? And what makes a great profile? That's a fantastic question.
And our audience could be different. It could be a highly skilled principal gift officer, or it could be like a development director working at a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
What do they need to know?
So true. Yeah. So knowing your audience is critical. Well, Jen, we've got about 5 more minutes. I wondered if there's anything you in particular would like to share as you prepared for our chat today, or if there's any question that especially resonates with you that we want to cover in the last few minutes. So the court is yours.
You're throwing it on me? I should ask you a question. I had somebody do that to me in an interview. I was like, okay, we'll go with that. Kat Banakis. She was at Grenson Bucklear and Associates. What a hoot. I guess just to share that part of what has been such a great experience is that I've grown up in a field that was small. And grown up, the first thing I did was sign up for Prospect L and my supervisor told me about APRA and I should go check them out. I went to a conference, and that intimacy was pretty amazing. Being able to ask questions. We've gotten big. It's a little more difficult, maybe falling along specialties now to get that level of intimacy. But that nurturing environment really made it possible for me to grow and thrive in this as a field. Early on in my consulting, I was first thing I did was go out to some of the smaller nonprofits. It took me a bit to figure out who was a good client for me. And then it was always like, well, they wanted the fundraising. Well, I'm not a fundraiser that way. Like, no, I don't want to write your appeals. I don't want to give you advice on major gifts. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I could with confidence stay strictly prospect research. Helen Brown does it. Why can't I? Right?
Sure.
It's great to have role models. And then also that there's enough meat in this. Like, there's enough education through APRA for me to start learning and to reach out to other people and network. So it's been a wonderful experience. And I'm really glad that people get to come into this environment.
Absolutely. And I just admire people like you and Helen Brown that got into this profession at a different time, when it was small, as you said, and intimate. And you have not only stuck with the profession, but you have expanded the sharing the knowledge and the content, and continue to ask questions to keep it fresh. So, like, again, like, what makes a great profile? I just think, that experience, that expertise is so valuable in a very different landscape now. As you mentioned, like, we're more specialized. APRA is larger. There's more chapters. Whether it's virtual settings, in person, that the landscape has changed. But thought leaders like you are thriving on that challenge and adapting in ways that are really helpful. So I appreciate people like you that are committed to this profession, because it's really fascinating.
Yay. And here you come along, right? I want to see this video cast going for years. No pressure.
Thank you.
No pressure.
Well, Jen, maybe in 10 years, you can interview me and you can throw some deep questions my way. And I'll be like, where did the last decade go?
Exactly. I'm doing it. You're on.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for your time today. It's just been a delight for me to talk with you. I appreciate your time, as well as the invite to be on your Chat Bite audio interview coming up. And I really wish you the best with these upcoming courses you talked about on finance, as well as looking ahead and developing specialized thought leader content. And again, would love to participate as you may need, my opinion. And have a great weekend. And for our audience, you can find Jen's conversation on the People in Fundraising webcast on Monday, March 20th. That'll be on LinkedIn as well as on YouTube. Same day, Jen's conversation will also appear on my website, peopleinfundraising.com. Thank you all for your support, and I'll see you again soon.